and Elias are my parents, and I've been a lawyer for 21 years, and I work with a lot of First Nations across the country. And the chief and council asked me to come in and to look at the roles and responsibilities for chief and council. And they had, you guys are probably aware of the comprehensive community plan that they put together a few years back. And this is one of the outcomes of that plan. They were asked to do, to set out what the roles and responsibilities are of the chief and council. They were asked to put together conflict of interest policies and a code of conduct. So this is some of the, this is the third piece of what is followed up from that comprehensive community plan. And so we met with the council today, and we had a discussion about whether they should be here. We agreed that they shouldn't be here because it just allowed for everybody to have an open conversation without having them necessarily be here and giving their 2 cents in.
Yeah, that's why we voted them in, to be here.
To be here. So,
yeah.
And so one of the things we talked about when we were talking about it, because they thought some people wouldn't want them to be here, some people would want them to be here. So one of the questions they actually wanted me to ask you is whether you think they should be here.
They should be here.
Yeah?
Yeah. But we're elected them, so they should be here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we went through this with them already this afternoon, so they know what we're going to be talking about. But we'll definitely give them your feedback and let them know. You know, you know, some people would probably like that they're here, and some people feel like they can't really speak freely and openly if they know some of the council members are here. So they decided not to come, not because they didn't want to be here. They just wanted to give people the opportunity to speak freely. So that's the reason they're not here, not because they don't care, because I think that we had a really long conversation this afternoon about everything we went through. We're going to go through here tonight. So they've had their views known as well. So the reason why we're getting together is we want to talk about what the chief and council are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And then also in this whole, the way that the community is governed is there's also like the administration. So what's the role of the administration in governing the community? Because the roles are separate and they're different. So we just wanted to go through what that good governance, that's what they call it, good governance. What does that mean when you're looking at First Nation communities?
That's white man's law.
Yeah.
The way it is.
Well, but how could we make it our law? How could
we have our own Indian law already.
And so do you?
We have the chief and council. That's why we elected.
Mm-hmm.
You know what guideline? No. Well, it's guideline, but when we elect you for council, well, you go around campaigning, right? You say you're going to do this, you're going to do that. At the time when it comes in, nobody wants to be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way it's done. Before it was better.
What was better about?
You go see the council and you tell them what you want. And that'll help you.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, all we do, you got to chase them around. So, that could turn ugly too. Well, they turned ugly, but you gotta face the fact. That's why you run for council. Oh yeah, I totally agree. Well, when you don't just campaign and say, oh, I want to be a councilor, but once you get in there, hey, you're gone. I think a part of it is how you campaign, and that has to change. Yeah. Because that's where you get into the promises and stuff compared to what can you do as a person going in there, not what can you get. Well, you got to look for projects and that. You just don't sit around and collect your paycheck. If you get one. Well, it shouldn't. Well, yeah, I know. I was in council when we got our money, but we had to look for a project and work. Well, same here. You don't sit around and my medical, but even when I was off on my medical, I never collected an honorarium. That's the community's money. When I was sick in the hospital, yeah. You got people that don't even show up to meetings. I know. So when
let's say, guidelines or governance.
Yeah, that's white man's law, that.
Well, no, you could base a lot of those facts on there about how we govern ourselves for over 10,000 years.
We've been doing that for 10,000 years, and we never got.
But it's not getting mashed in with the word we're going to indigenize laws. It's basically just saying that we're taking all the principles that we had before, but we're adapting them to how we need to use them now. But not say that we're going to do things like Hamilton,
Yeah, that's what that's what's happening right now.
Or we're going to indigenize what Hamilton is. We don't need to do that. We can just say,
just like trying to get in there.
Well, for here, it's the engagement, right, on how we're going to go about doing things, right? We still have to adapt, like, even the way we communicate with each other. Before, everybody used to write in a diary and want to private. Now everybody puts their whole life on social media and wants people's attention, right? Well, the way we do things in council meetings before, it's probably going to start changing the way we do things now. We got to talk more and engage with people.
Yeah, but even right now at the council meeting, it's a tough time to get 7 or 8 councilors.
Well, that's part of what we want to talk about with you guys. We want to talk about, what do you expect from your leadership?
They should all get together when there's meetings and public meetings.
Yep.
Yeah. So people can ask them questions and see what's happening.
Yep.
Communication.
Yep. Being updated on what the councils are doing. Yep.
You see it a lot in every other First Nations speak as one, right?
Yep.
And when you're in there, even the definitions of what a councillor is or what a chief is, it usually goes back to there has to be one voice, right?
Yep.
And the misconceptions I think that are still out there is when you get in as a councillor, you're the individual boss for, let's say, a certain section or the community. But that's not the case, because that's where the abuse comes in. That's where the authority is all mixed in with the administration and whatever it be, right?
Well, and that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about what the different roles of the government are, because there's so much work to do that everybody has to have a role. And people have to know what that role is, including the people who are performing that role, and they have to know, and the people have to know what the leaders are doing. So that's kind of what we want to talk about, that, like what is good government? What does that mean?
What I find with the chief and council, there's too much infighting. They're not united. They're separate. The way the teams are done, and when there's no structure and unity, you're not going to accomplish it.
They can't get together.
Can't decide on one item. It's got to be, we elected the chief and council to represent us, and that's the way it should be done. Not for their own sole purpose, or the infighting has to stop. We see that a lot, and we hear a lot. Things are not going to be accomplished if that doesn't stop.
That's when you ask council, I don't know. But why didn't we elect them?
There's a way to be a voice too without causing this conflict. So if we are, like, I'm not in there anymore. My health, I decided to leave. But when I was in there, and when you are talking, I saw it as we're representing, not just these small little parts. We're representing basically like our whole community, our whole nation of everybody here. So if we're gonna be representing us in a way, of course, there's going to be infighting, but a lot of the infighting is just stupid stuff. It's greedy stuff. So when you get down to it, that's why we implemented these code of conduct, these rules and everything like that, to keep everybody in check, because there was no checks and balances on the Canadian Act. There was nothing there. It's basically, here's what you guys got to do. The government's going to close their eye, and you guys sink. That's your fault. So there's a way to be accountable. And I remember when we first brought this up, there were some questions in there, and still to this day, one of my last meetings I was there is, we need to get rid of this code of conduct. It's not part of who we are or how we govern each other. And that was so confusing to me, where you want to remove something in there that people are saying that it keeps them in check, it keeps them accountable, but we can also kind of adapt this law on how we see coming forward, right? And the other argument was, I heard when this happened in the council meeting, was we were probably the most harsh on each other for governing ourselves, where they would mark their heads and we did wrong and this and that, right? Like
You got marked.
You hear about it, you got marked, right? So
That's
that's a way to keep you in check, right? So with this, it's not, of course, that extreme, but it's in a way, you got to check yourself. You've got conflict of interest. You've got to report them. You've got something going on, inside information. You're held accountable. You got to report these things. So that's something there that we can shape. We can keep going with it, but we got to hold ourselves accountable. Because I mean, we're representing ourselves when we go to chiefs meetings, meeting with ministers, and you know, last thing we want is you can't make decisions within the community, but we're sending you out to make decisions with ministers and our natural resources and everything like that. So that infighting, that inside, it's so hard to govern ourselves when we're always fighting with each other. And how do we, you know, we represent the community. We have to really represent the community. Not just I'm going to represent my neighbor and get him shingles or something. I sat around at the chief's table for almost 2.5 years for the AFNQL, and the same thing happens at the chief's meeting when you're meeting with ministers. It's what can we these individuals in the city? Well, no, you got to think of the big picture. Right? Think of yourself at the same level as this government, because when we go to these meetings, a lot of the time when people talk, it seems that we're putting ourselves down here and we're letting them, that paternalistic type relationship still, where we're scared to talk with the minister or the prime minister, whatever it may be. When you come back to the community, you can't lose focus or lose who you are either when you're talking to community members, because then you start, you know, you're acting the same way as you didn't want people to act towards you. You're a counselor, you're not going to talk down to people or them, and I can do this, that power, right? And how do we make it so even when we're at meetings, we're not talking to the community, we're not sitting with them? Is it a circle? Is it, I think right now we kind of lost where, how do we even talk to one another, and who's in this position of authority, right? Like, well, and there's so much emphasis on social media, right? Like so much is going, nobody talks anymore. Nobody talks face to face, right? It's all on. And how do you adapt to it, right? And that's one of the biggest things I noticed when I was in there is,
you know, we're taking too much direction from the outside. Take for example in the human resources department. You know, all the things that they're trying to implement, it's human resources people from the outside that are directing our bank council on the way things should be done. It's like a white man's law, or you know, their own rules and regulations. It's totally different. You know, and there's too much emphasis put on the way that they think and the way that our people think. And, it's hurting our community. You know, it's hurting the people that are working within even the bank administration. You know, there's so much that in the last couple of years, especially with the one that they hired from Calvin. Oh, she turned that bank council upside down. I've seen it. I worked through it. You know, and they have to get away from that. You know, and start doing things what the people want and what the community needs and that is good.
And that's kind of one of the things what we want to do, right? We want to talk with you about what does the community want? What do you want from? Yeah.
With the public.
Before you go see somebody and say, oh, you know, and all that. Now I'm going to say, hey, what do you want? It's a big change.
sort of a fight through social media, right? Like that's a huge aspect, and even the way we behave and how we deal with each other. It's no different from the fear mongering that happens in the States, and it's always around election time here.
people on the outside, if they want to vote, they should come on the reserve.
So I mean,
6 months before elections.
like the part where,
Then they'll see how the reserve is run.
yeah,
That's the way to do it.
like if somebody
But
has
right
a problem
now,
with,
right, just send out the papers and anybody pulls them on, tell them that.
well, that's building up the election code,
Yeah.
right, the electoral code and all that.
Yeah. But I know, I've seen it myself in
Well,
states.
our membership, for example, from the last time that we received the money, it went up from 2,500 to over 4,000.
Yeah.
It doubled within a year or so. That was a lot for the people that are used to it.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know.
So with this right here, and if you're not an employee of the bank and you're a counselor, what basic protections does the community have for, or something in place to say this counselor's held accountable to do their job right, and how do we have these checks and balances on that person, right?
Yeah.
Abusing.
Well, essentially, that's what elections are for. Unfortunately, there's a lot of time between elections, right? But you know, what we want to do is to see how do we increase that accountability. And one of the things that we're talking about is having more community meetings, like regular community meetings, so the council can give everybody an update on what they're doing, that they're face to face with the people who show up, and that they get a chance to ask questions, right? What are you doing with this, and how come you haven't done this, or maybe you want to do this, so that there's that constant communication. But the part of the problem is, though, that we have to get to a place of respectful dialogue. You know, as a leader, I wouldn't want to get up there every 3-4 times a year and have somebody beat me up. Hey, Lester. I don't want somebody to come and beat me up verbally. Like that's not the point of those, right? So how do we, but you know, and so we've got some ideas about how the council can do that, and we'll talk about them when we get to like the portfolio section on portfolios. Hey,
Then when you get around election time, the people who are actually looking to be as putting themselves up, offering themselves, they're getting into.
Exactly.
See, it's not just I'm throwing my name. Some other communities, you got to pay to run. You know, I'm going to run for council. I got to put up $250 of my own money, and that's when you see how serious it is.
Yeah.
$500 for cheap or whatever it is.
They always said, you know, you're serious enough to run for council.
There's places that do that.
That's why we have 50, 60, 70 councilors running every time different areas for council.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like with this, yeah, you see the structure and you know yourself you're getting into. So if the councilor does have to report if they have a portfolio I'm accountable, I gotta what was your update this month? Who did you meet with this month? What is how not just the minutes from a council meeting, but it's almost like you're saying, hey, this is not a part-time job, but a full-time job. What exactly are you doing, right?
Yeah.
And how are you guys? Is there same way we were doing evaluation, I think, on employees, you know, like not in this a different way, but how are things going? How do you feel you're doing with the council, the community, or like this feedback?
Mm-hmm.
More community meetings, right? More engagement, and in a way where, yeah, we're not screaming at each other. We're not, you know, I think I missed 2 public meetings, but I was there and engaging, and it gets hot, and you have to let them vent.
Mm-hmm.
But you also need somebody to help moderate and facilitate that conversation. So
Yeah.
the person they're going to get, they're stressed out, but you got to do it in a way too where we're all humans, right?
Yeah.
Sitting there still human.
Yeah. But I think you'd find the more meetings you have, the less that would happen, because then people have a regular opportunity to, they don't feel like they're penting it all up for one meeting, right? Like there's, they get informed as you go along, and then
all these misconceptions that keep coming up and
yeah.
For nothing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we just want to talk about what is good governance. How can we improve it? How can we have consistent and transparent communication? You know, we have a conflict of interest policy that has been developed, and procedures for politicians and the directors. There's a code of conduct and accountability. So, you know, this is all, I guess, I said earlier, it's in a follow-up to the comprehensive community plan that was done before. So this is just another step that the council is taking. So what is governance? You know, I think we all have our own ideas of what governance is. But there's some really good examples out there about how First Nations have developed their governance structures in a good way, and that works for them. But essentially, just to give you a bit of an explanation, you know, governance is how this nation will manage itself, how it will manage its businesses, its finances, its policies. You know, how do we preserve our traditions and our culture and our languages? How do we structure our institutions so that they work for the people? And how do we make decisions that, you know, will achieve our goals, both as the leadership, but with the people? Because there's different parts of that make a good government, and the people are a very, very important part of that. You know, so every government has a structure. You've got a legal structure, you have a political structure, and then you have the administration, right? The people who do the work on the ground every single day. And then you have the process, you know, how the council makes its decisions and how they're accountable and how they communicate back to the community. And then and it's the administration that takes the decisions of council and they implement them on the ground, right? So if you want to have, for example, if there's a policy, a new policy on fisheries, for example, right? They included the lobster chopping as part. So how does that get implemented? Well, it's the fisheries department that's going to do that, the natural resources. So they're going to take that new law that was developed, and then they're going to apply it on the ground. So that's kind of how it's supposed to work for everything, not just fisheries. So what we did here is we set out some definitions, because I find that we always use these words and not everybody understands what they mean, or everybody has a different idea of what they mean. But when we say accountability, really, it's taking responsibility for the decisions and the laws that have been developed and the policies that have been developed, and taking responsibility for those. So, you know, and I think council has responsibilities to be accountable. But I think the community does too, right? Like everybody in the community has to show up at meetings like this, and they have to give their feedback. That's the way it works. Otherwise, you can't sit back and complain if you don't get engaged and you don't participate. Transparency. So, how have decisions been made? Are they open? Have they been communicated to the people? What reasons were used to make a certain decision? That's all transparency. That just means being open about how you arrived at a decision, what things you considered, what things you didn't consider, and why. Political interference, and this is a big one that I find a lot of First Nation communities are challenged with, because there's a way that the governments were run before that they think it should be run now. Right? So, and Rennie, I think you gave a good example a while ago. If somebody came and said, you know, okay, you know, Lloyd, I need a new porch. Well, you know, that counselor shouldn't be making that decision, because that's the decision that should be made by, I don't know which department is it Capital or Public Works? Capital or Public Works? Yeah, housing, right? Right, the housing department should be making that decision. And the reason why is because, you know, I might have different access to the chief and council than you know, Hillary might, right? So I can't be using the people I know as a way to get what I want, because it's not fair for everybody else in the community. So really, you know, we want to minimize political interference. We want the chief and council to be making like the decisions that affect the community as a whole, right? So whether it's developing the forestry laws, the fishery laws, whether it's negotiating with the government on, you know, budgets and stuff like that, right? Those are the kind of the big issues that the chief and council need to be involved in. But the day-to-day stuff, like making decisions about who's going to, you know, get a new porch or who's going to get a renovation, or those are the things that should be happening at the director level. Another big one here is fiduciary obligation. You know, we hear a lot of talk about that, and it's usually about the Crown, Canada's fiduciary obligation to First Nations people, or the province's fiduciary obligation to First Nations people. But what happens when somebody runs for council, chief or council, and they're elected? They automatically have a fiduciary obligation to this community. Every decision that they make, they have to do so with the best interest of this community in mind. And that's a legal obligation, right? So if the council made a decision that wasn't in the best interest, they could be sued. Because that is a legal obligation they have. So, you know, if you're voting on something, typically as an individual, you vote for what you want because it's going to be good for you, right? It's going to address your interests. But as a chief or a councillor, you have to think of everybody. And not just today, but for our future generations too. That's what being a leader is. Because if you don't do that, we're not going to have a community in 50 years, right? So it's a really important decision. And, you know, and I think we can come back to the discussion we were just having, Lloyd, about, you know, the discipline of our councillors. They might disagree, but they have to come together and make a decision that's right for the community and stick by it. You know, and you can't just walk away from the table because you didn't get your way. That's not what being a good councillor is, or a good leader is. It's about working together to try and resolve disputes and make decisions that are good for everybody. And trust me, I've had this conversation with the council today. we talked a lot about it. And stewardship. What does stewardship mean? You know, we hear a lot about that in terms of environmental stewardship. It means our obligation to look after the land, look after the water, look after the finances of this community, you know, look after the interests of this community. Collective. Collective is really about everybody's interests as a whole. So the whole community's interest is a collective interest. When you look at rights under the Constitution, our Aboriginal rights and our treaty rights, those are collective rights that everybody holds in common. And you can exercise them individually, but they're rights that everybody holds. Alternative dispute resolution. And this is something where we want to talk some more about later on, but really an alternative dispute resolution is a different way of resolving disputes. So normally what you'd have is you'd have a separate body. You'd have another group of people who are appointed to hear what's happening, hear a grievance. So if somebody, for example, use the example of a renovation. If somebody went to housing and asked for a renovation, they didn't get approved, but they're still upset about it, then they should be able to appeal that decision somewhere, right? Go to another body, not the chief and council, but go to another body and say, okay, this is the reasons why I think I need my renovation. And then you have your director of housing come in and say, this is the reason why we made the decision. And you have another group of people who are completely independent of all of that and just talk about it and try to resolve it in a good way. Maybe they don't get maybe they get part of the renovation that year, right? Maybe they say, okay, well, if you can wait till next year, we can do all of your renovation, right? So just trying to resolve disputes, but just by talking about it and compromising, and because a lot of times people don't understand all of the considerations that go into making decisions, especially by the directors. So it's just looking at a different way to resolve disputes. And the portfolios and directorates. One of the things that the council's looking at is this portfolio system, and we had it before. I didn't realize I didn't have it anymore. But it's assigning councillors to individual, you know, to individual directorates, and saying, okay, this is
6 months has gone by and the portfolios have not been assigned. Why is that?
I don't think that nobody seems to understand.
Hold on to all the portfolios and try to control everything himself.
Yeah.
He's putting a lot of burden on himself.
Yeah.
You know, that's why those 12 councillors were elected.
Yeah.
They should at least have 1 or 2 portfolios to take the burden out and the work off the chief.
Mm-hmm.
They've had arguments over that, and I think you know about that, right? The portfolios should be assigned.
Yeah.
Everybody should be on a portfolio.
The table it, but why has it not been taken
You know what, Harvey? I don't think they understand what the role of a portfolio holder is. They don't understand it.
I don't think.
When we would bring that conversation up, the word that would be thrown around is, it's in our mandate to do this, and this is what I had to do. Ask, well, what is your mandate? Explain to me. And these are seasoned counselors who couldn't explain what a portfolio is and what they should be doing within the community. A few of them think, I have a portfolio, so I'm going to be
I'm the boss.
the timekeeper, I'm doing this, and I want my 14 weeks, and this and that. That's insane to me.
14 weeks.
It's insane to me that
Before it
somebody
used to be,
support.
back in the 80s, maybe 90s, was 14 weeks for council.
No,
Once
but
you got your 14 weeks, you get laid off.
But that's
Well,
got
they
nothing,
use that as a job.
that's got nothing to do with portfolios, or any portfolios are assigned to people, so it takes the burden, the way I see it takes the burden off the chief, to take care of the little things that he doesn't really, shouldn't be burdened with.
Mm-hmm.
they gotta understand what it is.
And report to the chief.
So if I'm having the portfolio of education, it doesn't mean I sit at the education complex
No.
and talk
No.
with all the administration there.
No.
It's, okay, now I have to post-secondary, the minister, all of these different things, right? It's a huge, huge file.
Yeah.
You know, public security, it's not, hey, I'm in charge of the police and chief of police, or forestry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Some don't know what that means.
Yeah. Well, and that's that's exactly it, Lloyd. There's not a uniform or consistent understanding of what that role is, what that job is as a portfolio. It's not your job to tell the director what to do or any of their staff. It's not the portfolio holder's responsibility to make decisions about what's happening on the ground. You know, they're a liaison. Like, they take the issues that happen in that education directorate, they bring it to the council table. They would take, if there's a negotiation that has to happen with the provincial or the federal governments, then they're the ones that they advocate. They advocate for that directorate, right? But they don't. The reason what we were told that they haven't assigned those, because they don't know what the job is. They want to develop some kind of policy or framework to say, this is what you should be doing and this is what you shouldn't be doing, so that they can exercise their jobs properly without pissing off all of the directors, and because that's.
That's to assist the chief in listening his burden of work.
Absolutely.
Report to the chief. Your whole portfolio. If you're going to attend meetings or whatever, that's when you report to the chief, so he has an understanding of what's going on.
When you come back from a meeting, you bring the paperwork and you explain,
Yep, you give them an update on what happened, and yep.
Like a year and a half ago, when we were starting these conversations, we actually put stuff out to all directorates and said, this is what we're doing. We're trying to build these portfolios, and we want to have an understanding from the director what they feel a counselor's role is in that. So we had feedback from the directors to say, what do you think? Okay, should the person who's maybe going to have that portfolio, should they have some knowledge about what they're getting into? Do they have an understanding of what this department does? Like health, it's got so many areas of what's going on in there, so a person, what you're getting yourself into. Have you spoke with the director? Have you, you gotta have this type of.
And for those types of big directorates, maybe you need two.
Yeah.
You need two, right? Because we were saying, today, we were saying, well, what if there's 3 meetings happening that day? You can't be 3 places at once, right?
Yeah.
So.
For a few different directorates, you can have
Yeah.
low ones, you can have. It's not set in stone that
Or
this
even a
person
person can have 2 portfolios and then ask for an assistance when required.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot. We have a lot of things going on at the band level that's beyond one person's capabilities of handling everything, but education, public security, fisheries, forestry, it all has to be spread out in a portfolio form.
Mm-hmm.
And still report to the chief and council.
Mm-hmm. Well, and bring the issues back to the council table for a discussion and a decision, right? Like, this is what's going because that one portfolio holder can't make decisions.
That's an important discussion.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
No decision-making authority, but they have to come back and they have to relay it. And where you can't get it all mudded up is when you're confusing the portfolio with what our oversight is as chief council over the administration and the directorate.
Mhm.
You'll hear that, well, they voted us in, we're in charge of these directorates, so now we have to turn into the managers.
Mhm.
But where do we kind of marry those two when they say old school, new school type of way without to say, yes, we are oversight, and we do have to have some authority over these directorates, but to what level, right?
Yeah.
That's where the structure keeps breaking, where we lose a supervisor, or we lose this or that. And now you're back in a position where who's our go-between right now, right? So when we're creating these portfolios for the directors, we have to know what our authority is.
Yeah.
And a lot, yeah, and these public sessions are really good. Like, it's great you had the conversations with them today, right? And you see, like, it's a big deal. And then more of this gets pumped out into the community, then the community will see it's a huge
Yeah.
job. It's a
Yeah,
huge job
it
for
is.
somebody to be a counselor. You can't work, in my opinion, it's so huge if you really take it seriously. It's a full-time, like crazy job.
It is.
Crazy job.
I agree with you, and that's another question, right? From my mind, being just speaking as a community member, how many counselors do we really need? And should those counselors get paid? Should that be their job? You look at other governments, federal government, provincial government, those are full-time jobs. They get paid salaries because there's so much involved.
They have a staff, they have this.
Yep.
You go on these meetings, and I've said on behalf of the community for our Minister of Natural Resources with Gasprig and I'm sitting there, and there's maybe a few of us here, and you got 15 people.
Oh my, do you want to go see my wine?
It's intimidating when you don't have the staff that you should behind you.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to get things done when you don't.
You go into these meetings, you want to be prepared, you want to have your assistant, you want to have somebody taking notes, you want to, you're all these different things, and they have their chief of staff, they have this, they have that. They come in a room and they bombard you with it, and then it's.
Yeah.
How do you come back and report to the community and say, yeah, I was going to bat on your behalf by myself?
Yeah.
We don't have it.
And those are the types of discussions I think, if we start to look at stepping outside of the Indian Act, right, and becoming a truly self-governing nation, those are the discussions we have to have, because once you do that, we're on our own.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and we need to figure out, well, what type of economy do we have? We need a lot. There's a lot of that takes a lot of money to make things work properly. So those are a lot of serious discussions we're going to have because that's the way we're moving, right? We're moving. Government is now, the federal government is starting to say, well, you guys should start governing yourself.
We're taking a Fortune 500 company and taking a person from the community and saying, you want to take over this corporation?
Mm-hmm.
Be my guest and start representing us at the. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Think about it. You run for council, you get in there. You better be ready for some huge stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the internal stuff that we got going on over here, but when you think of this government and the vision of it.
Yeah, and governing not just the reserve lands, but our whole territory, right? Because that's where we got to go. We shouldn't just be looking at the boundaries of this reserve, right? We need to be Yeah. So those are big questions and big discussions. And I hope that if we go there, and we talked about this today too, if we're going there, let's do it properly. Let's get out there and talk to people and figure out, do people want to go there? If they do want to go there, what's it going to take? And, just start that conversation.
We want our title for this
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready for it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the conversation that's going on at the bingo hall with the land code.
And these sections you cut out from the Indian Act by taking over, management.
It's a big conversation. Yeah.
It's a great conversation. Good, but
it's great, but hope you have the money to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big question.
Because the government will say, well, I told you.
Yeah, you're on your own.
You're on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just set out some of these principles of good governance on this slide. You know, it's important that, you know, the government has legitimacy and voice, which means participating and input from citizens. Again, you know, we need to make sure we get input from our people. Direction, having a strategic vision. So that's what the council typically does, is they come in and they say, and that's what they're elected for, right? Whatever their vision is for the time that they're in office. Performance, we want to make sure that people, our leaders, are responsive, and the people who are serving the community in terms of the directors, they're responsive and they're effective and they're efficient, and everything's got to work really well. Accountability, you know, the council has to justify decisions in a clear and open way. The directors have to justify their decisions, which means they can't just be making decisions willy-nilly. They need to have some reasons and structure around that. And fairness. Fairness is, I think, is one of the most important principles here, because everybody's got to feel like they're treated fairly, or else they're going to get angry and they're going to have, they're going to lash out. And, you know, it's really important that we make decisions that are fair and equal for everybody, and that the decisions are complies with the law. And not just, I'm not even talking, when I say the law, outside law, but our own law, right? The laws that we make for ourselves. So, you know, our harvesting laws, all of that stuff. Like we have to make sure that we make decisions that comply with those. So essentially, you know, these are the different components of our government. You have your leadership, your chief and council, you have your citizens, and you have your administration and operations, and they all have to work together. And, you know, nothing is going to be perfect. Everybody's going to have something to say. Everyone's going to have problems. But at the end of the day, you know, all we can do is try and make these different components the best that we can. So in terms of our people, it's the people who want to participate in the governance. So like you guys are coming to this meeting, that's an important role that you're playing in the interests of the community. The administrators, they manage the day-to-day programs, right? So the paving, the housing, the health, you know, I went to get my flu shot, you know, like there's all these people that make those different directorates run. And the leadership, though, like the role of the chief and council is different, because they don't get involved in those things. Right? And then so you have the role, what is the role of the council as a whole, and what are the roles of councillors individually? And those are the types of things I think we need to understand a little bit better. So now we get to use our clickers. Okay, Roma will hand out clickers who doesn't have them. So, and you guys can participate too if you want a clicker. So the first question we want to ask is whether you feel that the information is being from the community is being communicated to you consistently and in a clear and open way with respect to important decisions that chief and council make. So you can yes, no, somewhat, or you don't know. And what we're going to do with these questions is we're going to take them back and we're going to look at them and just see what the feedback is and how what recommendations we can give to the council to improve that.
So we'll actually see the results.
Yeah, we'll see the results as soon as we're done. So everyone's... No, you just got to press it. Yeah. So once everyone's done, let us know and we'll...
Or blow it up.
I don't know anything about this. We're relying on these guys.
Yeah, has everyone?
Is everyone done?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now if you go to the next slide,
Oh.
it should show the results.
Sometimes the report is double.
Okay. All right. So 20% is yes, 40% is no, and 40% is somewhat. So let's talk about somewhat. Is that because sometimes they communicate and sometimes they don't communicate, or is it? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. We'll just take your answers. I don't want you to, it's like a voting ballot, privacy of voting. So our next question is about accountability. Do you feel that your voice is heard and acknowledged by the chief and council when it comes to important decisions? Just click anytime? Oh, yeah, see, so not sure. So 50% of you, which is three of you. Or no, did you? You did? Oh, okay, there you go. Don't feel like they are. So, you know, and this is important feedback because we want to try and see how what we can do to improve that.
Will that be brought back to the chief and council, or how is that listen?
We will be tabulating the results, out of all the sessions and bring it back. Yeah.
That'd be shared with everyone though too. Like
Everyone.
Like the community as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we do at the end of this is we're gonna put a report together, and we're gonna include all of this information, so everybody will see you'll see what the other groups have said about these things as well. So what we wanted to do is just open it up for discussion. I mean, we've been having discussion as we go, but what are some of the ways that you think that leadership can improve their communications? Communications is a huge topic, and it's so important, and it's one of those areas where we don't get funding as a government for that. Right? There's the federal government, provincial, nobody gives funding for communication. So it's one of those things where it's so important, but there's no base funding for it. So they got to kind of take it from other budgets. So, but it's really important. So, you know, we have to look at ways, not just what I find, like I live off reserve, and I find that I don't get a lot of information about what's happening here at home, well, except when I speak to my parents or my sisters, right? But, you know, we rely a lot on social media. You know, we don't have these personal connections anymore. And
even with social media now, because of the, you know, inaccuracy, you'll get a total different picture of the community just by. It depends on the perception too as well, because like for myself on social media, especially Facebook, I got out there in 2007 after a brief stint on there. It was just this overwhelming wave of negativity and opinions, and I was like, no, this is not for me. So I had gotten out there.
The band has a website. Is that updated?
it is. It's actually, yeah, it's updated actually very regularly. But the fact that you don't know that, right? I'm not saying that's your problem, Harvey. That's the community's problem, right? Like there's people who don't have computers, who don't know how to use computers, who don't want to use computers, right? So, you know, I was talking to my mom this morning. She goes, there's so many people that, you know, if they produced a update every month, a written update, right? Like a note, like a what were we calling it?
Like
a newsletter. Yeah, a newsletter or a bulletin that people get. Exactly. Yep. And radio, even have a newsletter or a bulletin that can be read over the radio, so people can hear it, people can listen to it, or they could read it.
You forget about landline. Like at the high school, you know, a student is not in school today, you get an automatic caller at home, and that would be the grandparents' first line of communications, or the parents at home. Not social media, whatever it is, they get the phone call. So, I mean, why can't we go back to if there's an important council meeting, or if there's an important update, or, you know, every night I get a message from CMS. This is the vice principal, you have, why can't we have these calls going home to people who maybe want to hear that, or an elder, or a voicemail or something? So you get they're getting a call on the old phone, and there's something that's going on, or 90% of the community, whatever.
90% of the community probably don't have their landlines anymore. It's all cell phones.
Yeah.
A lot of people disconnect their landlines.
Actually, there's still a lot of people that I'm talking to the Telus guy. There's a lot of people that still kept their landlines at home, that wanted to keep their old number, but even for cell phones.
Come to the Elders Lodge.
But yeah, like an old way, right? Even a voicemail can go to a cell phone or whatever it is, or somebody doesn't have Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get into CHRQ tomorrow, whatever it is. What's going on? There's a.
But the newsletter, I found was a better, was a better system to get
Communicate with
communicate
Yeah.
than the websites and.
So you'll hear like I like it, and then when you go to the post office and they see 50 of them flying in the site.
Well, and that's what somebody said to us today, right? Like you got to balance it. So maybe you get, okay, who wants a newsletter?
Who wants a newsletter?
Right? Ask that question. Who wants to go, door to door? Who wants a newsletter? Right? Well, there's 200 people who want a newsletter. So then you produce like 250 and then. No, they go with fire starters. Yeah, I mean, because you don't want to be printing using a whole bunch of paper, right? If it's not, it's just bad for the environment.
Your mom, she said it was just a full-time job. I think at the time that she would have for FYI page.
Yeah.
That was huge. That sparked a lot of conversations and documents and minutes and.
Yeah.
That alone is what she's saying. It's trying to get to the community and talking and.
Water.
Yeah. Yeah. There's water. Yeah. I mean, that's what it takes, and that's what I'm saying. There's no dedicated funding for that, right?
Thank you.
Here. Peter, do you want a water?
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
But it's an important investment. Very important to have.
Dad, come to the Elder Center. Do a personal presentation. Yeah, I know, right? Sorry. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, does anybody have any other ideas to improve the way that the leadership communicates with the community? We talked about like the newsletter, the bulletin, the radio station.
You have to dump money into it to be effective.
Yeah.
It's a very important.
Yeah.
Very important area. Like you guys are doing great, but I mean, it's.
We tried with the newsletter, but it's just basically just me working on it, and I have like 6 million things.
Communications is their own directorate, like it's huge.
Yeah.
Like the national.
But we're actually really small. Because like, we need to be big.
You need to be
running 2 events at the same time right now, and I've half my equipment over at the bingo hall and all this year.
What do? You guys do a great job at it.
You need more of you.
I would love to be big, but I don't need some help.
Yeah.
Everywhere but nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's what it's basically come down to. Where you can't be, pulled in every direction.
Mm-hmm. Peter, were you going to say something? Well, the other thing that we talked about, I think, before some of you guys came was having these regular community meetings, right? So, where if we had portfolio holders, they would come and give an update on what's going on with in the departments that they have oversight over. So that's an important piece. I think the more you have community meetings, people will come because they want to hear what's going on. You know, there's an opportunity to get feedback about, you know, certain decisions that have to be made. So that's another area that doesn't require necessarily like a lot of staff, but it will require like the directorates to be working with the portfolio holders to ensure that they have all of the information to provide the update. So that's that's a good way to communicate with the community as well. So the next slide that we're on, you'll happy to know we're halfway through. What are the leadership best practices? And we want to just discuss what the vision, the governing style, the principles, and the best practices for chief and council and individual councillors. So now we're kind of getting into the, you know, to the very specific duties and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. Yeah, so, you know, based on, the LMG developed some draft guidelines on roles and responsibilities, and that's what they asked us to look at. And so what they did in these draft guidelines, I think they looked at a bunch of different, what other First Nations were doing across the country, and they just kind of looked at what the community needed and put a draft together and said, okay, what do you guys think? Let's have some community sessions and talk about that and see if people have ideas to improve them. So the vision that they set out is that the Listuguj Mi'kmaq First Nation, through its people, shall strive to achieve a balanced society where every member has equal opportunity to fulfill their individual potential in a safe and sustainable environment on traditional lands, where the spiritual, cultural, physical, and mental well-being can be achieved and where basic human needs can be attained. So that's like the broad vision of the chief and council. And then we look to the values. Well, what are some of our values? And if you have other values that you think should be in here, please use this opportunity to tell us. Our community values will require council to maintain as a priority a constant focus on the Listuguj community, support the involvement of all community members who desire to participate in advancing the interests of Listuguj, respect our history and culture, respect various perspectives, ideas, opinions, beliefs, and wisely use their resources to achieve our goals. So, like I said, if there's other values there that you think are missing, those are the values, of course, of the council. So the council's role in terms of governance, their primary responsibility is to govern as one body, to make decisions that are always in the best interests of Listuguj today and for future generations. And they should really be, when they have their meetings and they are in their council room, when they walk out, they should be really walking out as one, with one voice. You know, even if they didn't agree with the decision, it's the decision of council, and it's a very, very difficult thing to achieve. A lot of First Nations have problems with that because if they take these decisions a lot of times very personally, and they just don't like to when they don't get their way. The chief, under the Indian Act, has quite a limited role. He chairs the meetings. He's like a board. He's like a chairman of a board. He chairs the meetings. He doesn't get to vote, or she doesn't get to vote unless it's a tie. And he or she is essentially the spokesperson for the council, for the government, and for the community as a whole. The council will govern with an emphasis on collective leadership, respecting different viewpoints of council, accepting the decisions of the council as a whole, even where there may be difference of opinions or different viewpoints. Respect the separate roles and responsibilities of council and the administration. As I said, there's different roles for each of those bodies, and really to make decisions that will be sustainable for the community into the future. So, you know, their style of government, again, is to protect the best interests of the community, emphasizing a sustainable future for future generations, respecting the distinctions between the administration, which are the directorates, and their own body, the council chamber, be proactive in their leadership and be accountable and transparent. This all sounds really good, doesn't it? Sounds good, but right? But how do you do all of that, right? And that's one of this document on roles and responsibilities is hoping, one of the purposes for it to guide the chief and the council in trying to achieve those objectives. And again, it's depending on every individual councillor at that table. It's up to them to be able to believe in these things and to conduct themselves in this way too. And a good chair, that's right. Because what happens when councillors don't comply, when they go rogue, when they, what happens? These are difficult things that we have to consider. So what the council essentially does, they make laws, they develop budgets, and they're the stewards of the financial resources. They do strategic planning, right? So what is the, over a 2 to 4 year period, what are their objectives? Like, what do they want to achieve in that period of time, and how are they going to do that? They're in charge. The only person that the chief and council are in charge of is the chief operating officer, the band manager. They don't have any other staff, unless they have staff in their office. Like some have an executive assistant or, any type of support that is directly to the council. But their main employee is the band manager. But we don't even have a band manager. They're looking for one, right? So it's a tall order, right? That band manager has to work with the chief and council. They have to work with with all of the different directorates.
Whoever gets the job doesn't know what you can do.
It's a big job. Yeah.
Gotta make sure that you structure in a way where it's not set up for failure. We can post a position and hope somebody applies for it, but are we actually setting them up for the next person?
That's another position that requires staff.
That's a staff. That's the person that's not only in charge of the whole community directorate, but the band office alone. That's another section where you need a director of or a band manager, the old, like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the staff is the people that are under him.
Mm-hmm.
Like an immediate staff. There has to be 1, 2, 3, 4. There's got to be an organizational purpose for that particular department of executive director, the assistant executive director or director of operations, and your executive assistant to that, because
sometimes there is not enough money in there to.
That's it.
That's where our individual roles as councillors are going out there lobbying and saying, hey, what is do separation of Indian affairs, whatever it is, Crown.
But what does it take to run a government effectively and properly? Let's put that budget together, and let's take that budget and negotiate with the federal government as a transfer payment. Just like provinces get transfer payments from the government, doesn't mean that they're any less of a government. But this is what the needs, in order to service a population of 4,000 people, this is what it's going to need, right? And so you're right. Like, if you don't have those positions to support, the chief operating officer or whatever they've used so many different terms for that. Yep, and that we need proper support in order to get things to work effectively. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about communications and how important that is, yet you have, 1.5, 2 people doing that, right? And there's just so much to do that it's press releases and keeping the website up to date and keeping the people up to date. Like, I can't even imagine. It's.
This councillor met with this minister for this or that, or there's another community meeting with another debate or whatever, like.
Yeah.
Use for each
yeah.
meeting,
Yeah.
It's got to grow. If we have a vision, just for our community and these roles and to grow, I mean, you also think about the place where we're doing it. I mean, that building is outdated, it's small, and we want to keep having the community grow, and we're just jamming people into a building where there's no room. So we got to look at it.
We're jamming people into a reserve and we don't have any land left, right? Like it's,
We bought land over here, we're building over here, we're looking to grow. Big. So we got to build a bigger house to hold our
administration. Honestly.
You build it, you want this staff, and then once you start feeling it, like, we have a vision where we're going.
Back in the 90s, we were talking about Buckbee's land there, and we were supposed to put buildings there and everything.
Yeah.
Well, you never know with the economic development with the building, because I know when your plan is.
I was right there when you check the land there, it goes bad.
I think strategically, you cross into the States, you go to Burlington, Vermont, or these places by the water, beautiful, multi-million-dollar land. Then you come back home and you see the same thing. And then you think, like, why can't we get our things together on how do we build this waterfront, beautiful community? And it comes down to what kind of people do we have in there as chief and council to actually help build this and lobby and go out to the government.
Go and lobby for money.
Not internally, but externally.
You gotta go out there.
And a lot of people have good ideas. Then how do we get there without conflicting with another person? Because of his last name or he doesn't like me, or the personal feelings that everybody gets caught up in important council meetings where we make decisions. Why is the agenda so long? Oh, because I don't want this done. I don't want. You got to think of not what you want, what community needs, and that's where we get bogged down is in this government. Council meetings, and we got to pass these things. Can't do it. Can't do it at fair. We can't do it at public meetings. Because this is a huge role, responsibility, this role that we're doing is huge for us.
Yeah, we'll get a sense later because we have a slide there that has all the directorates on it, and you'll be like, "Holy smokes!" You know about them when you see them all on one slide. You're like, "Wow, it's a multi-million-dollar operation."
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's still under resourced and.
The money we get and the money we get from all source revenue, we're basically matching. We're basically just the same what the government gives us.
Yeah.
I mean, if we really, we're going to get to a point where we don't need the funding we want to see. Like if they're in huge, like in Nova Scotia, where they're over there, the money we generate for the community. We're just about what the government has to give us and what we can bring in and where we can go.
Yeah.
But we need something where.
You need the support to be able to do that.
We're a little backwards in compared to Nova Scotia and the other communities. In Nova Scotia, they
learn to work together.
Yeah.
It's fear of change, and how are we gonna implement that change, right, without making it too scary on why we're doing it or door stuff.
You go to mill doors and you get big companies there, these big companies, they get all their money from the
But at another hand to that is we don't want to sell ourselves either. Getting under the umbrella of the province, right? The money might look good, but it might be what you go in with.
Money's good, but it goes fast.
If you really want to sell, you got to be careful.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to be realistic too. Quebec is probably one of the most difficult provinces to deal with in this country. Yeah. Yeah.
The way they treat us is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say yes to things, with that.
You gotta give them a hard time, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the other things in terms of the responsibilities of council that we talked a lot about with Chief and Council this afternoon is the committees and advisory councils, like creating these committees that will involve the people as well and help to advise them on different issues. Like that's something that I think they should start to look at a little bit more closely, because of just the sheer amount of work that has to get done. And then we talked about, alternative dispute resolution, looking at different ways to resolve grievances and complaints. Relationships is a big one. The council has to have good relationships with other First Nations, with provincial, municipal, federal governments, and with the people here too, with the administrators and with everybody else in the community. So there's a lot of relationship building that has to happen. In terms of the program delivery, they have to be able to support the directors in their roles, not tell them what to do, but support them. So what does the director need from the chief and council to get the support that they need to make sure that their area is running properly? Council processes. If they don't have any rules or policies, then they just do whatever they want, and that's usually doesn't result in good governance at all. And then their conflicts. If there is a disagreement between council, then how do they resolve those? It's really depends on the nature of the conflict, but a lot of people walk out and some don't come to meetings, but as a council, they're all entitled to know what the decisions are. So it's making sure that they communicate those. So what's the role of the individual councillor? Again, it's really to speak with one voice with the rest of the councillors. And they're not supposed to, individual councillors aren't supposed to make decisions on their own. They need to be making them as a group. They don't have any authority to interact with the media or other public bodies unless they've been given that authority by council. So, they can't go and they can't enter into a contract. It has to be a decision of the council as a whole through an order in council. Councillors need to respect the processes, the documents, everything that gets signed and approved, who the signing authorities who act on behalf of Listuguj, including, council resolutions, contracts, purchases, payments, all of that stuff. They can't go and just override those types of decisions. Individual councillors need to respect the approval procedures. And councillors will be assigned portfolios at the beginning of elected term, which hasn't happened. We had the discussion why that hasn't happened. But I think if we can help them build some structure around what those roles and responsibilities are, what they should and shouldn't do as portfolio holders, it would make things a lot straightforward for them. So only the chief and council, the chief and council they set these big just make the big decisions, the strategy decisions about what their priorities are going to be, and then they should be giving them to the administrators. So they don't get involved in the day-to-day operations, though, as we've talked about a lot at the beginning. They're not supposed to go and approach any staff member and say, you're not doing your job properly, or you're taking too much time on your break, get back in there. That's not the role of the councillor, right? That's the role of the director, and they need to be given the authority the directors need to be given their authority in that regard. And let the human resources policies and processes, take care of whatever, employment issues that come up. And they're not supposed to discipline them. They can't say, get back to work or you can get fired. That's not their role as a councillor. Council will not make decisions regarding employment or program matters. And this is an important thing for the councillors to understand, is that if somebody comes up to them and says, oh, you know what, my director didn't give me the time off that I wanted. Well, then the councillor doesn't say, okay, well, let me go talk to the director. The councillor should be saying, go and take that up with your director. And there's a process, there's an HR process that you need to follow. And if that doesn't work for you, then hopefully there's an ADR process, another grievance or appeals process. But the councillor shouldn't be getting involved in those types of decisions.
So councillors shouldn't be bringing personal issues up or HR issues at the meeting. That happens all the time.
It shouldn't. It should not. They shouldn't be. The councillors can't use their position of authority to get what they want. That's not what that's not your role as a councillor.
And if we deny, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing by say, I have a problem with so-and-so, and I tell the council, all right, well, I wanna get on the agenda and I wanna address council because I don't like what's happening with the director. Okay, so I get up there, right? Council says, well, this guy wants to speak, he's a community member. Should be able to speak to chief and council, they voted us in, we gotta hear them out. Knowing well that we shouldn't be allowing this situation to happen, because specifically, they're getting involved in this. We've had a few of those happen, but the way we handled it was, okay, we're not gonna tell the community member to leave, they're already there, right? So we're gonna hear them out, but we say from the beginning, if there's any human resource information, your personal information, all the stuff that's in here, it's an open meeting, you're just opening us up to litigation right now. It's lawsuits, there's all kinds of stuff, you're infringing on other people's privacy and you're bringing it forward. What I want to say is, okay, listen, if you have a situation, before it gets up there, if you want me to listen to it as a council member, you're a community member, I'll listen to you. But I can't make any decisions regarding this. What I can help do is help facilitate you meeting with the person you're supposed to be meeting with, either your director or your manager. And just saying, so that way I'm hearing you out, but we can't bring this up to where you think it should go. I can help you get to where you need to be and facilitate that conversation and advise the director and say, listen, this person came to see me. They want to bring it to council. They have clear concerns, but I don't think maybe it's the right place, but you still need to hear it. And you can still advise council on that situation. But on the other hand, we don't want to enable behavior where then you start thinking like, chief and council will listen to me, I'm a community member, I have no voice.
Yeah, no.
So it's hard.
It's hard to say no. Nobody wants to say no.
No, but you gotta also understand where the person's coming from,
Yeah.
what their intent is, if it's malicious intent, if it's just out there to do whatever it is, and you can pretty much find out right away. Then you also have to know if the counselor has any malicious intent, or if they want to cause some harm or bring the LNG into disrepute or something, you know? So it's...
Well, see, that's the thing about the processes. The processes, if they're developed and if they're followed, it will prevent that from happening. So in that instance, right, if somebody comes up to you and you want to help, then you're right. You bring them to the director, you bring them to the chief operating officer, the band manager, and the HR person. That's where that gets resolved, right? And if it doesn't get resolved there, then hopefully there's an appeal type of process, right, that they can follow. The chief and council is not the appeal process. That's not the appropriate place to do that. And, you know, and I told this story this afternoon, I've told it before, because I've got a client in Manitoba who, it's his second term of chief. He's been chief for like 6 years now. And so he started working with his council to train them and to train the people that, you know, the council is not there to make those types of decisions. So his council now, today, they all say it. If somebody comes and asks me for something, I say, no, you have to go talk to that person. No, you have to go talk to that person. And you say that long enough, then that goes. But if there's a problem in the directorate where things aren't happening the way that they should, then the chief operating officer should say, okay, you know what? This needs to go before council because there's problems in this directorate and we need to deal with them. Right? And that's kind of the way things should happen. But again, councillors need to be disciplined to be able to say that, you know.
That's where our oversight comes in. That's when you can say, chief and council as a whole, yes, we're holding this directorate accountable.
Yeah.
Or this, not an individual, maybe because they went through the appropriate change and reporting. You want to try and find a way to resolve everything, right? But,
yeah.
But it's that, how do we stop? You want to continue to talk to people and being that almost, you know, like, yeah, you want to be able to talk, you want to be able to come in and talk to the chief, you want to be able to come in and talk to a counselor, you know.
And you still can, right? You see somebody at the post office, you can still talk to them. You can say what's on your mind and stuff like that. You know, if there's regular community meetings and you get to talk to people there and hear, you know, you can still talk. Nobody, I don't think, has any intention of saying you can't talk to your chief and council. That's not what it is. But if you have a problem, then you need to go to this specific part of the administration.
Are
Mhm.
they taking advantage of the whole process?
Yeah.
Using it for their benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, clicker time. Everybody wake up. So in this slide, we're talking about resolving disputes. Do you think the LMG would benefit from having a neutral, independent body to support complaints procedures and resolve disputes? So this is essentially the appeal mechanism that we were talking about throughout the presentation. Do you think that if there's a dispute between a person and it could either be in an employment situation, it could be just a person who doesn't like the decision about not getting the renovation, putting that to a third, a body that will hear the complaint and try and resolve it.
Right now, they don't have that.
No, they don't, but should they?
That could be created with a terms of reference the same way an oversight, ultimate an oversight committee.
Yeah.
So once it gets to that point, okay, well then that group is.
Mm-hmm. Would that work in the community? Would people? Because in order for this to work, people have to be able to accept it. They have to be able to say, "I want to use that. I think it's going to work."
Same way restorative justice, both parties have to agree.
Yeah.
And then you have to.
Yeah, and it's not imposed. It wouldn't be imposed on anybody. It would just be an option if people wanted to use it. Would that work?
Right now, not one person should be making the decision and that's it. The decision is final. You have there should be agreements,
Mhm.
like, it shouldn't be the chief and council. I agree with that. Yeah, I have no problem saying just open it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everybody clicked?
Yep.
Oh, look at that. 100%. Yay!
We agreed on something.
As a lawyer, I love this. Yeah, so I mean, we talked about the visions, the values, the roles, the response, like what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. Are there any other expectations you have of the chief and council? What does that mean? Elaborate on stay in your lane.
Don't involve yourself in management.
Yeah.
That's just from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've woken up to come to work on Monday to find out that I have persons that are in my directorate now that I need to hire. And it's like, but that's not just the 2015. No, it's a great conversation.
And that, you know what, that's clearly not, they should not be doing that, right? But they shouldn't even be doing it. The only person that they should be hiring is the band manager. I'm just going to use that for luck because everybody knows what that means, right? Right? So in the directorates, it should be the directors who are working with the chief operating officer to hire their staff. Because you're the ones that have to work with them, right? Chief and council doesn't have to work with them. So yeah, that's a very important piece. And every time I've spoken to them, I've impressed that. And I think in order to, and we'll be talking about the portfolios, but that's where it has to be crystal clear, because you don't want a counselor coming in and doing that because they hold the portfolio for public safety, right? You don't want that happening. And that's so we have to make sure that they understand what the limits of their roles are, what they should do and what they shouldn't do.
Access to information. What are they going to do with it? Why are they requesting? Council speaks as a whole, not individuals demanding or wanting information from specific areas.
Okay, so what you're saying is individual councillors shouldn't be asking for information from any of the directors.
They shouldn't be doing, and it happens. It happens a lot. It happens in different areas of the band office. It happens in different areas of the community. Why would this counselor come in? One person should be doing that. Why is this counselor coming in here and taking pictures of contracts? Why is this counselor coming in demanding to see this, to see that? Happens question this and that. Why? And then when a director gets wind of it, or a manager gets wind of it, and they question that authority, you're in fear of getting fired. And that's where you get into people won't talk, people won't come to these sessions. Sometimes they communicate in fear of, am I going to be blackballed? We fired the senior director. We could have been sued. That was the worst thing ever. And it's passed just like that. And that's clear, like that's insane. And what happened? So how can we tell the community, hey, nothing's going to happen to you?
Yeah.
When clearly we don't even have a replacement in there yet. When clearly we fired the top person who's supposed to be in our administration without any B or C, like plan B. So how do we tell the community it's okay to speak up if some counselor or chief is abusing their authority without fear of that's where these strict structure guidelines come in on why we have to govern ourselves accordingly because of abuse.
Yeah.
And it continues, right? And so when you see these clear roles and what a counselor is in a portfolio, I believe, hey, you've been warned.
But the harder question is, what's the consequence?
So that's it. You got to come up with it. Right? You got to understand.
It's going to be used because there are rules that govern all staff, and there's consequences to your actions. However, at the leadership level, up until last year, a year and a half ago, there was nothing. There was nothing there. And you had counselors that had carte blanche. Do as you please. Say what you please. Now, the community is stuck in this culture. Hey, if I want something, let me just go see this guy. He's the one who likes to yell and scream and everything like that. Let me go see him. And he'll yell and scream at whoever, staff manager, staff director, supervisors, construction sites, whatever, Those who yell the loudest are heard.
So when it comes down to, let's say somebody's out of line or whatever, they're going to duck the condom or something. What's really good is that separate civilian neutral oversight body, whether it's comprised of community members, elders, different people there. So that person, it's almost like a public hearing that you're bringing this person before, right? If they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
It's a disciplinary committee.
Yeah, you gotta listen, you gotta hear it, you gotta
So okay, so let me ask you this question then. This person's elected, and so how do you justify a consequence when that person's been elected by a sizable number of people in the community? Yeah, I it's just hard, right? When you're, because the person's like, well, I was elected by 400 people. I have a right to be here. No, I know. Diplomatic immunity. Yeah, no, I know, I understand.
That's where these rules come into play, right?
It's the problem is enforcement, right? Like if there's no who's going to enforce it, and how, if that person doesn't want to comply, like what is ultimately what's the remedy in that situation?
No counselor. I mean, you can sue individual counselors. For what's going on, and people don't realize that when you act a certain way, depending on the decisions you make up there, or if you bring in personal information in and all this stuff, then you're opening yourself up, right? So the legal ramifications. I think if it's a financial depends on how far the person's going in their duties, right? Like,
Yeah, but I think this is what we struggle with, you know, with this, like what are the consequences? What happens when they?
yeah, and it's got to be the group of chief and council to
Mhm.
enforce it, right? And how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And have this person brought for a hearing? Is there an arbiter? Is there going to be another jurisdiction coming in? Are we going to have, let's say, now severe, you know, need a neutral party? We're going to have somebody from Belawani come in and accept justice, listen to our case, and this counselor
Mhm.
did wrong and should be suspended or removed, or, you know, I don't know, what is the community think, right?
Mhm. Oh. 7:45. Okay. Okay, that was our health break. Do we need a health break?
No,
Just run through it.
run through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a lot about this along the way. So I don't think it's going to take us that long to get through it. But this is the portfolio and the directorate management. So these are all of the portfolios that Listuguj has in its as part of its government.
Yeah, and, intergovernmental affairs.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a lot. And you know, there's 12 counselors. So I mean, I think it's a manageable, I mean, if everybody had 2 or 3, you know, and then it's trying to figure out, okay, well, who should have these portfolios? Should they have the experience in the particular area, you know? Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, you know, when we're looking at what the roles of the portfolios holders are. But in terms of the administration's role, you have your chief operating officer, your band manager, who is responsible for hiring and firing all of the directors, right? And then the directors themselves are responsible for hiring, firing their staff. That's how it's supposed to work. Yeah, so and then the administration is responsible for the day-to-day operations. So each of the directors do the job within their various directorates, the staff do their jobs, and the chief band manager, the chief operating officer, oversees all of that. And they're responsible for implementing the delivery of the programs and services to the people, right? And in terms of the council's role of all this, the council sets the strategy at the beginning of the term. These are our priorities. These are the strategies. These are the things we want to try and achieve over the next, you know, however many years. And then they let the administration do the rest. But there's an overlap sometimes, right? There could be some things that are happening that need political direction, decisions that need to be made. So there will be areas of overlap. So in terms of the portfolios, typically what happens in other First Nations is the chief assigns the portfolios. They talk with the person. They say, okay, you know, do you think you can run education? Can you oversee education? Yes, I can see over it. Okay, then you take on that. And then if a counselor works for education, then they won't be assigned that portfolio because that's a conflict of interest. And then the chief typically is a member of all, you know, they call it ex officio member, so that he can or she can sit on any of those on any of those portfolios that he or she wants. So what the council does typically for this portfolios, any concerns they hear, they will direct them to the chief operating officer, the band manager. They'll act as a support system to the directorate. So if any issue arises, they essentially act as a liaison. So they'll say, okay, well, this concern arose in this directorate. They can talk with council, see if there's a role for council in making the decision, or the chief operating officer too. That's where you'd go first to the chief operating officer. If it can't get resolved there, then you go and raise it with the council. And then that person also gives the council updates. What's going on in fisheries? What's going on in forestry? They represent and communicate all activities within the council to the council table. They maintain communications with all of the different departments, First Nation organizations, government, special interest groups. So they do negotiating with, you know, whatever governments they need to. They faithfully bring to the attention of council all the requests and issues and initiatives. You know, what if fisheries has a new program that they want to try out, right? And they need some funding for it. Then they would typically go to the council and get approval for that. And then any other responsibilities that that may come up as required by the council through an order in council. So what council does not do, and this is probably more important, right, is they won't get involved. They shouldn't get involved in all of the day-to-day activities of the program, and they need to always be aware of political interference. They can't be getting involved and using their power as a councillor to get what they want, or what their family wants, or what their friends want. They will not act as a supervisor of any of the directors or the managers. And council are not responsible for program finances. So the budgets of the directorates are not that's not the councillor that has the portfolio should not be getting involved in any of those program finances, because that's the role of the directors. So this is we didn't realize that there were no portfolios until we got here today. So, but it seems very clear that there's a little bit of confusion over what these portfolios are. So, well, they couldn't agree on what the role of the portfolio people, the portfolio holders would be. But he needs. The chief needs the support of the councillors too. And I think that might not be there.
Or we wanted that, and if you can't agree on what they're actually doing, then you can't hold them to that standard.
Yeah.
And we'll just keep it floating around.
As arbitrary, like anything can happen, right? They could do whatever they want. Peter?
Particular council members are appointed to a portfolio. Will the directorate have the opportunity to have a say in that? Let's say chief appoints council member to portfolio, in which you probably might not, or you might have some sort of information that is not going to be a good relationship with that individual. Where, can the director have a voice in the appointment of it?
Typically, the decision at the end of the day is typically the chief's.
Yeah.
And I think it's up to the individuals, the style of that chief, whether they want to consult with people, consult with the person that they're considering, consult with the director, to see, this is, what I'm thinking. What do you think? So it's not something that the chief has to do, whether it's a best practice or not. Like you want it to work, right? You want that relationships to be a good relationship, because the director and the portfolio holder have to work collaboratively, right? Like the portfolio holder is the political advocate, whereas the director is what's done, but they need to work with each other in order to be effective.
As a chief, you should not do a portfolio for somebody that's not, not going to hope. It's going to be conflict, but most of the people are the person's going to be fighting or trouble. Shouldn't be that portfolio, whether you want it or not. It's a chief's decision. What the chief is there for. But you should also explain to the individual that you're not putting a portfolio because it's going to be this and that.
Asking you, right? Like, I don't think you want to do it, and you may think you might not be the right person to do it. You file or something that capacity, right?
Yeah. Well,
what builds you up to get to that role, that would you could be a you could be like secondary to the
yeah,
role, right?
Yeah. If there's two positions, if it's a big directorate and you need two people. but the thing too is that these portfolios aren't written in stone. You know, they can change in a year's time. If one counselor's not working out, they can switch them.
That's what they do now, the democratic process, the Prime Minister shows his.
Cabinet, yep, yep. Even if it's not working out, it's actually, if it's not working out, I think it's, you know, the chief has to consider reassigning that portfolio, right? You know, because the goal is just to make it work effectively. Yeah. So I mean, if this whole system needs to be, and we're having meetings with the directors too. So we're going to be talking about this. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot from them on these portfolios as well. So that will all go into our recommendations. So in terms of so we developed these questions before we got here, and we just got here and found out that, oh no, the portfolio, because I always assumed that portfolios were assigned, but they weren't, as Harvey said, for the last 6 months. So if given everything that we've talked to, and given your current understanding of the role of council and the administration, who would you approach to raise a particular issue? Would you approach the chief, the council member with that portfolio, the band manager, the director or the manager of the program, or you're not sure? If you have an issue, where would you go?
The chief issue is the portfolio.
Yeah, so it's not an issue with the portfolio. If you just had an issue, say a regular issue, like you needed wheelchair accessible ramp put on your house, where would you go? No. Yeah. If you had an issue, where would you go? Everybody done? Oh, how do we go back?
You might have to do that on the.
Oh, there we go.
No, you just skipped on.
Oh no, I went to see those results. Will it have kept our data there? Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Somebody goes the chief, council member with the portfolio, band manager, the director manager 50%, I'm not sure. Okay. Does anybody want to say anything about that, or? Okay, so the fifth question, we're just about at the end. Given everything that we've talked about throughout the evening, do you have any concerns that there is political interference by your council in the day-to-day management of the directorates? I think I heard some of the answers already, but. So do you think the councillors get involved in the day-to-day decisions and management when they should not? Yeah, that's a pretty significant. Nobody said no. So kind of, and then probably. Okay, that's interesting. So, I mean, I think this is one of our last slides, just to see if you had any specific concerns about the roles of councillors in the administration, and, you know, what can be done to improve. What do you think, you know, how do you think that any of the problems can be addressed? I know we've talked about it a lot throughout the evening, so, but if you have any other suggestions, you can.
I think there's about maybe 4 councillors, so many entities.
Mm-hmm.
There are, each each council you see, there are usually about, roughly about 4 that really don't do anything. They carry on with their regular day-to-day, jobs, with fine,
Mhm.
and that's all it is.
So what makes you think that?
Just inactive, just, being at some of the meetings, seeing some council members who are inactive, either, verbally engagement, or, or anything otherwise included.
Mhm.
Creates a lot of instability, well, especially when it comes to agreeing on issues at
Mhm.
the table.
How is needed?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, and I'm not trying to belittle the council in any way. It's just that it's too big.
Mhm. So do you think if it was reduced to 8 and that same counselor who was inactive would be more active?
No, but I think perhaps we need to be a little bit more selective.
Mm.
Because some come in just by popularity of vote, because they're a cool guy, give out the most beer at a party or whatnot.
Mhm.
You get into maybe a full-time counselor or a part-time counselor, and what are you bringing to the table? Are you bringing your job to the table or the community, or you can't mix? Like I'm in here because of what I'm doing as a counselor, not because of what I'm doing as my job, and
Mhm.
myself and my director as that.
Mhm.
That's totally not what you're there for.
Mhm.
That's really separated. It's hard being a part-time counselor.
Yes.
Attending meetings during the night or during the day and having the regular 8 to 4 and trying to, it's not fair to the counselor, it's not fair to the community when you think about it.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into, if you're going to be a counselor, should the counselor only be a full-time role?
Mhm.
And I think that's where you'll get the most. So if you, let's say if you cut it down to 8 counselors, but they're dedicated full-time counselors with staff, then that's probably where you're going to see you'll be able to engage them more, or question them more. How come you're not at this community? How come you're not at council meetings? What's your attendance? Why are we paying you honorariums? Why are you,
Mhm.
can't use the excuse that that's not our job.
Mhm.
Why are you, like it's.
So what do you think about having regular community meetings where the portfolio holder comes and gives the update on what's happening in the directorate?
Well, I was at a dinner with somebody this week, that was there, kind of stumbled on it, gathering, I remember this was, I tried to, our portfolio holder was looking on to development and some weapons and needed to sell it and stuff, there's some of the people, that be doing it and be done and, what could be done, things like that. Portfolio holder should be able to, sit down with the public and, what has been done.
Mhm.
Open house.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm thinking like these, if there were regular meetings, like quarterly meetings, then these portfolio, it's a measure of accountability. Yeah. Mhm.
Quarterly meetings, maybe monthly reports that they put out to, that they're reporting to their, let's say, chief and council every month. They have to report, but that also goes to the community, right? So the community hearing from the councilor, 12 times officially on paper, 4 times during the year,
Mhm.
you have this on top of the regular council meetings that you're attending on, the public meetings that chief and council should already do. So that's really pumping a lot of information in, that's a lot of engagement, that's a lot of really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll start being able to assess, you know, is this the right person to be representing us? And that person will probably think, am I the right person doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's,
Well, yeah, it gives people an opportunity to say, you know, oh, this counselor's not really doing much. I don't think I'm going to vote for him next time, or her.
you start seeing it, you know, like absence, you know, I haven't been at all, you know, they start really
Yeah.
coming out there,
Yeah. Okay, I don't think there's anything else after this. Just a pretty picture of our community. Yeah. So unless there's anything else anybody wants to say?
Your house on that line?
I only see the garage, right in the corner.
I was trying to see if you buy his house, I was like,
No, it is, yeah.
I'm
No,
in
it
the
is.
right.
No, it's all the correct one.
There's a few of us here, but it's good to talk.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you everybody for thanks for coming. Well, you can take these things home and
Yeah, we gotta do a
I
couple
thought
of
there'd be more people.
Here.
Oh, yeah.
You got two,
you do the
two cards.
I don't want to be accused of a conflict of interest. Two. We have two.
There.
And I don't know how much they are for because Jill got them.
I don't know either. Harvey.
He was the first one through the door. See, that's why I didn't want to do it.